I'm Glenn McGinnis, and this is Outburst. On the program, do you keep track of how many single-use plastics you use?
I personally do. I do try to minimize as much as I can.
I never track it, no.
It's not something that I tend to focus on, really.
It's not something that I've personally given a lot of attention, I would say.
But first, recently, decorum in the House of Commons was once again put to the test. Case in point, an exchange between the Prime Minister and the leader of the official opposition, where Pierre Poilievre referred to Justin Trudeau as a wacko Prime Minister. House Speaker Greg Fergus demanded Poilievre retract the statement, and when he did not comply, he was banned from the House for the day. While many Canadians may prefer a more civil exchange in the House of Commons, is removing a member from the House punishment enough? We sent our cameras out with this question.
Should the punishment for MPs using inappropriate language in Parliament go beyond expulsion? What would be appropriate?
I don't know if they should go beyond expulsion, but they should have a penalty for using foul language in Parliament. I don't know what to say the punishment should be, but I think they should be accountable for their actions because they are a public figure.
Looking at somebody's tenure there, if they've become somebody that's had a history of acting like this, or using these sorts of phrases, then yeah, I would say looking at their position as a whole and the suitability of their role, maybe they're not somebody that you would want as an MP.
Maybe they shouldn't be an MP anymore. I think our MPs should act with honesty and integrity, and bad-mouthing somebody and calling them a name doesn't accomplish a thing except to make me wonder why somebody has voted that kind of person in.
No, I don't mind them using some harsh language. If it's done relatively tastefully, but sometimes a bit of harsh language does, shift people's minds pretty quickly. But I would prefer to see the Parliament be professional. But I know they have to use lots of the politicians are lawyers, and they have to. They're a brash, aggressive group of people. And
No, I don't believe so. Definitely things get heated and things are said in the heat of the moment. They're saying if it's inappropriate words that aren't racist or hate language, I believe that it's appropriate to have an expulsion for that day.
I think the expulsion I think it's justified if terms like that are being used, but I think that it should be fair towards everyone in the House, because I believe Trudeau called Poilievre spineless as well during that same debate. I think it just should be the same across the board instead of just directed at one person.
Well, I think it just depends on what's said and how it's said, really. The context of the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, what he said about Trudeau and his operation there, being quote wacko. I mean, the speaker told him 3 times to correct what he said, and he just interchanged the words with other words. Extreme, he said, and other things like that. So after giving him multiple opportunities, I think there should have been a penalty, and I think what the speaker came down with was right, was appropriate, because you got to maintain decorum in the House.
Expulsion being I'm assuming just for the day.
Yeah.
No.
You think that's appropriate?
Yes.
Okay.
I agree.
It should just stay there.
Yeah, one day. They learned their lesson, I would hope. They're supposed to be adults.
I think expulsion is enough, actually, and at least for a day, I'd say for sure. And I don't really buy that the Conservatives were saying that the Speaker unfairly sort of targeted Poilievre or censored him. I think calling somebody a wacko is completely unparliamentary, so that's what I think. I don't think whatever it was the Prime Minister said was not. Yes, spineless, but it's not, I don't know, I don't think it's on the same level. And I'm not really a fan of either of them. Less of Pierre Poilievre, but I think it was fair.
So I think personally, when you're in a professional role like that, we need to hold people to a pretty high standard. And I think using an appropriate language, when you're in a position of power like that, it should definitely get the proper punishment, and it might have to go beyond such.
Like what?
Maybe we could talk about legal actions and maybe fines for using inappropriate language.
What would be appropriate? Well, expulsion plus fines, some kind of reprimand, because they have to have respect for the country's main facility. That's what it's there for. They want us to have respect for government. They should at least have respect for the building they're in.
In order to create an environment where people think that the politicians are having good conversations that are based on like they're making evidence-based decisions and it's not personal. To me, when you start using that kind of language, it sounds more personal, and I think that we need to get back to the politics of governance as opposed to the politics of showmanship.
I don't think beyond expulsion, but that, again, it depends on the severity of what they are saying. If it's very outlandish, very out there, if they are personally denigrating someone, then yes, I think it should be.
So what would be appropriate?
I mean, some sort of fines.
I tend to use pretty colorful language. I know like Parliament isn't the place to be using it, but I feel like expulsion should be good enough. It might, depending on what they're using, if it's a racial slur, maybe, yeah, definitely things should go further than just expulsion. But if they're just dropping an F-bomb or an S-bomb or something like that, like, I could see past that.
From the clothes we wear to the packaging our food comes in, plastics have permeated practically every part of our lives and the environment. In an attempt to cut down on plastic pollution, the federal government set a goal for zero plastic waste by the year 2030. That would include banning such single-use plastic products as straws, cutlery, and grocery bags. But the ban was a contentious issue, and a federal court ruled it unconstitutional, even though the ban is still in place. So what about you? We took to the streets to ask people if they're keeping an eye on their plastic footprint. Our question:
do you keep track of how many single-use plastics you use?
I don't keep track like number-wise, but it is very evident in the recycling bin. So that's something I'm conscious about, and I try to make sure it's all recycled. But it's so hard today because it's everywhere, you know? It's like with every packaging, almost everywhere, you know?
I personally do. I do try to minimize as much as I can. But for like the more unavoidable plastics, I do try to recycle as much as I can, or buy maybe like reusable containers or use reusable bags, so I don't try to create as much plastic garbage as I can. So personally I do, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. Yeah.
Well, I've had occasion to, travel on the seas in different parts of the world, and to see the amount of plastic and other pollution in the seas is really quite distressing. And then you see what happens to the animals and fish that live in the sea. It's their home. I find it very highly irresponsible of human beings to do that.
Definitely try and buy glass instead of plastic for long-term use, but I will say I'm bad with takeout coffee cup. That's sort of my downfall for sure. But yeah, I agree. Too much single use for sure. And I do try and monitor it. Yeah. So.
Like, I definitely try and keep track, but it can be difficult just because we're surrounded by single-use plastics. So I would say, like, I try and keep it to a minimum, but just like given the nature of my day-to-day life, it can be difficult. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I try to be mindful of like how much plastic I'm using like every day, but it's everywhere, and everywhere you go there's always single-use plastic somewhere, so it's really hard to avoid it. But I do try to keep it like on my radar when I'm like going out during the day. So yeah.
I don't keep an exact number, but I try to use as many disposable plastics as I can. I use reusable containers whenever I can, and I generally try to recycle anything that I can that's recyclable.
I do not keep track of how many single-use plastics I use. We do try to get away from them, and even in our businesses, we aim to only use compostable material and get away from fossil fuels and stuff like that. But it certainly is food for thought to think about keeping track of that sort of thing and actually having an idea of what I actually use, because I don't know if I could tell you in a day.
I try to limit my use of single-use plastics. I've got a reusable coffee cup that I bring around with me, same with utensils. I try not to use straws. So yeah, trying my best.
I personally don't. I don't really use plastic water bottles or things of that nature. I usually have a shaker cup with me that I just fill up, but it's not something that I've personally given a lot of attention, I would say.
I'm gonna be really honest here, not really.
Why not?
Why not? It's just that I feel like sometimes I just forget usually.
Oh, I always try to buy glass, but I know it's not necessarily affordable for every person, or that it's accessible in all places. But where possible, I prefer glass or something reusable.
I try to keep things organized and like understanding and looking at the labels of stuff and like having different bins for myself. But other than that, it is kind of, there's multiple different plastics that can't be recycled, and so like keeping track of it is a lot. So I can understand why that could be a struggle for a lot of people.
No, I don't. Why not? I don't know. I have too many things to keep account of in a day. It's not something that I tend to focus on really. They're convenient. You don't really think much about it. That's kind of my own flaw.
Yes, I use none. None.
How do you do that?
Well, I have actually, I have my own bags I use all the time. If I use a plastic bag at a grocery store, it goes in my plastic bag receptacle that I then reuse and reuse and reuse until it's worn out or has holes in it. So I was given this, but this has it's a Ziploc, so this bag will get used again and again and again. Okay? So I just don't buy plastic. I refuse to.
I don't. I do recycle as much as possible, and I try to lessen the amount that I use. I use, metal straws when I can, and in my house, of course. I use reusable wax wrappings instead of plastic wrap when I can. But I do not keep track. I do it when it's possible to do that.
I wouldn't say keep track of it, no. I try and be mindful because I know it is bad for the environment, and I try and reuse and have better alternatives when I can, but I never track it, no.
The year 2024 marks how many years Newfoundland and Labrador joined Canada? Is it 75, 100, or 125?
75. No idea, so I would say 100.
75.
100.
75.
75? 75.
75.
75?
Absolutely right.
Okay, good.
Good for you.
I wasn't sure.
In 1949, Newfoundland became Canada's 10th province after 400 years as a British colony. In 1948, Newfoundland held a referendum on whether to continue ties with Great Britain, stand as its own dominion, or join Canada. In the end, 52.3% of voters chose Confederation. After approval was granted by both British and Canadian parliaments, on March 31st, 1949, Newfoundland became part of Canada. In 2001, the province's name was officially changed to Newfoundland and Labrador.
According to Elections Canada, back in the 2021 federal election, more than half of eligible voters between the ages of 18 and 21 did not show up at the polls to vote. This could be attributed to a few reasons, like they're not actually interested in Canadian politics, they feel their vote doesn't count, or maybe the election process is too difficult. We sent our cameras out to ask Canadians what ideas they may have to help young people become more involved and informed to have their say on Election Day. Our question:
what is the best way to engage more young people to vote?
I think it starts with teaching them that their micro level interactions and talking to people and voting does actually make a difference, because as a society, we're taught that we're just a number, but if we can just spread the word about how our political views align, we can find what's the best solution to the problems we're facing here in Canada. So I think just having that discussion is most important, and then using your vote to best support what it is you believe in.
Well, first of all, you need to start using the platforms that they use. I mean, young people are not watching television anymore. They're not watching the news for their political information. They're going online. They're going on social media. So places like Instagram, Discord, Twitch, even in some cases, Reddit, Tumblr. Maybe not Tumblr so much, but my point is essentially this, is that young people are not disinterested in politics as many people might assume. They're actually very interested in politics, especially the more theoretical side of it. It's just that we're in a little bit of a lull right now because the people who are running the country, running the media, are older generally, and as a result, they're not as familiar with the mediums young people tend to communicate.
I think the young people today are looking for grassroots movements. I think they're looking for ways for things to be more affordable, and I think maybe having conversations about supporting our youth could get our youth more involved. You know, we talk about a lot of big things all the time, which we have to do in government, but it's also, you know, maybe it's not as accessible to people who are more focused on whether or not they can afford to pay their rent than you know, what decisions are being made at a federal level for the army.
A lot of it is maybe like the lack of education or like the lack of what to do exactly. I know like a big concern for me is I don't necessarily always know what I'm voting for, so I kind of stray away from it because you don't want to just pick randomly. So if there was more like tools and like easier ways to like kind of know what each thing represents and like what we're doing with it, I think that would be better. Maybe that's something we need to bring into schools.
Try and teach more of it in schools, I think, just so they have an understanding of it, and get them involved a little more in it, or have some kind of program in the school that they can learn more about politics.
In the school system, they take on a position as, when I went to school there was, and so we learned how democracy worked. We learned how you vote, and if you don't vote, then you really shouldn't have a say. And that's putting it back on the education system, but it's not necessarily putting it on the teachers. And we all learn how to have a voice by voting, by protesting, by being an advocate on something. And I think our young people need to get beyond social media to express themselves.
So it's a matter of involving young people in the decisions. It can't be just an old person's thing. I don't know how you do that, but if they're not involved and realize how it affects their future, they're not going to vote.
The decisions we make now are going to affect these people more than it's going to affect me, you know, so that's why they need to get involved. What do we need to do? More younger people involved in politics. Potentially, you know, getting younger people's ideas to the places where those ideas can actually come into action.
So I think listening to what the concerns are of the younger generation will push them to vote for somebody, because I think a lot of people right now who are younger don't really identify with anybody particularly because they don't feel like their questions or concerns are being answered.
However, to get them to vote, they got to find it within themselves to get interested in politics and understand that the leaders that make up society are only as good as you let them be, more or less, right? So you have to understand that you got to be proactive in your involvement, and that the onus is on the individual.
Honestly, probably social media. Like that's the most common thing like young people use. So it's like there are pros and cons to it, and being able to use it as a pro would be pretty good.
Well, obviously, simple answers, pushing out like the voting, where to vote, to like the social media platforms that we all use, because we're obviously always.
I see like the MPs and stuff like posting on TikTok and stuff, and like I see that because I don't really like watch the news that much. I don't read the newspaper that much, so I don't really like keep up with the news that way. So like if they like put out their like what they have to say like on like social media platforms that like we use, we're more likely to see it and more likely to like hear the message that might get people out to vote more.
I don't really know
what these people are running for and what they do. And I think making it more engaging for younger people, like more interesting and more accessible, and maybe like more young people to represent as well, because a lot of politicians are not in their 20s right now. Yeah, I would say that, because it's not really relatable for a lot of people. They don't know why they should be voting.
I don't know. I mean, I have young adult children and discuss that with them, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I really hope you go out and vote, but be informed first.
The spreading of disinformation on social media could be a cause for concern for the health of a democratic society. The deliberate spreading of false information could inflict damage to a democratic process if that false information reaches enough people. In our upcoming project examining disinformation and democracy both here in Canada and around the world, we took to the streets to ask people if the federal government has a handle on disinformation before it gets ahead of them. Our question:
is the Canadian government taking sufficient action to safeguard our democracy from disinformation?
No, it's not. It's been proven that we can see what went on in the United States, and if we haven't learned a lesson from that, which I think we're learning, but we need to catch up a bit. But it's scary what happened in the States. It's scary what it got to in the States, and how much disinformation influenced an entire election.
I think you need to allow for the free flow of information. So I don't necessarily know whether or not they're limiting that, but I think it's important to look at the freedom flow of information, and the solution to bad speech is more speech.
I think it was really a problem like during COVID, for example, when people, like the anti-vax problem, and there were so many people online saying like, oh, it makes you have these symptoms and these symptoms, and there was no actual proof of it. So yeah, I think COVID was a really good example of disinformation, and how, especially when everyone's inside and like the internet is the only way you have, it's like place you have to get information, it was a lot then. So.
All of my older relatives are on Facebook, and they're like constantly posting these like just this untrue information about, I don't know, like Joe Biden, the presidency. Like there was a lot of that during COVID as well, so that's definitely an example I can think of. And yeah, I think it's more common among older people who are more susceptible to, I guess, the lies that can be put out there.
I do not believe so at all. I consume a lot of information online, and I do my research, so I can tell when something is not proper. And I have seen many forms of disinformation online that have had like extreme amounts of popularity. And if you look in the comments, a lot of people are believing in it. And I just don't think the government's really doing the proper steps to make sure that people are getting the right information and not believing false things.
Every time I open my phone, I see it. Any like Instagram, any app, you see disinformation, like it's everywhere. It's kind of hard to control, but they're not really doing anything to like stop the spread of disinformation or misinformation.
I guess there should be more regulations put in place with the CEOs of these companies, as like they are in control of it, like down to the core. So it's like, I think the government has to work with the creators in order for there to be change.
I am not sure they're taking any action really. I'm not really aware of it. So if you had to ask people or pinpoint something they're doing, I don't think they are, but I definitely think it's out there everywhere. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think they're doing enough. I think it's just with everything, like the pandemic and everything, I think people are just like less, they don't believe in like traditional news sources as much anymore. So now it's kind of like they're getting their information from everywhere, and I don't think the government is really doing anything to protect that.
Especially there's all sorts of pages, yeah, all sorts of pages put whatever they want out there. There's a bunch of lies on the internet about.
And like, although some of it is like really blatantly fake news, not everyone could be aware of that. Yeah. And like, I've seen people who have gotten like, they'll just like share the information they've gotten. It's clearly like from a fake source, but they don't know it. Like they're taking it for like 100% true. Yeah. And it's really hard for people to like Yeah, I don't know how they would monitor it really. Like, I know there's the like information checker things and all that, but a lot of the time it'll just be like blatantly like false information, and no one can really, like, you can't really tell at all. So I don't think so. I think they could be doing a better job. I know it's a newer thing, the internet, but like it is where people get most of their information nowadays. So I think they could be doing a better job on that.
More can be done, yes, because especially for people like myself who don't understand a lot of stuff that's going on, I think a little bit more information is important. So I can understand what's going on, and I don't think they're doing enough, no.
I would say they're making steps towards that, as far as like Facebook not being able to spread media anymore, post news articles. Like, that's a tricky one too. That'll go back and forth, and I'm sure like this legislation will get lifted or changed a bit the further that we go on.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not as well read on this subject as I would like to be, but my immediate thoughts on that are no, and that's simply because the Canadian government is a very rich institution, and ultimately they have a lot of power. And misinformation is a really big problem, not just here in Canada, but worldwide. And there's a lot of very simple things that we could do that we're not doing. For example, it's not a foreign concept to install fact checkers, for example, but the fact checkers that we do have tend to be employed not by the government, but by private companies, and these people tend to have their own biases, they tend to have their own opinions which affect things, and I just think we need more academics, frankly, in this particular field, because studies do show, as a matter of fact, that people tend to want to be right, they tend to want to have the correct information, so as long as we're able to educate them, as long as most people are willing to be educated, which they are, the data seems to show that, we would have a much safer, more secure democracy.
Okay, so I have kind of an opinion about that, and I'm not sure if it aligns with what most people would think, but I think it behooves people to educate themselves on disinformation and to research and not to spread false information. I love my mother, but she'll like post something on Facebook and I'm like, this is inaccurate, like check into it a little bit more. So as much as I think that our government has a responsibility to kind of protect us from disinformation, I think that we as citizens are responsible for understanding what is true and what's not, or at least doing the research to kind of get a better idea.
Thanks for watching this episode of Outburst on CPAC. If you have any comments about this show or any other show, you can find us on social media. You can also find us on our website at www.cpac.ca. I'm Glenn McGuinness, and on behalf of my colleagues at the Cable Public Affairs Channel, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.